One time, years after my mom had died and my dad was getting up there in years himself, I asked him, I said, Dad, why did you let all of this go on? When I was a kid, like, where were you? Why didn't you defend me? Now, imagine this. We're standing in his bedroom in my house. He's in his, I want to say, early to mid 80s. He's looking like he's in his early to mid 80s. And he looked back at me, broken and old, and he said, you know how your mother was. I wasn't prepared for any of that, for any of it. I didn't know what to do. I mean, there was a real sorrow there, and, I dropped it. I didn't want to bring back all these horrible memories for him in his last years of life. Just a beginning note, while I'm sharing some of this lesser traumatic details about my childhood in this week's commentaries, if I tend to sound somewhat dispassionate or disconnected from it, that's on purpose. Please don't take it as anything other than what it is. My best attempt to talk out loud about all of this and still hold it together. Also, a bit of a caution, some people may be disturbed by the following info, especially young children, so just please be advised of that. Why I'm talking about all this, I'll say near the end. Childhood trauma imparted by parents to their child or children almost always traces back to something with one or both parents. That was especially true in my case. I've shared briefly in the past that my mother was raped at 20 years old shortly after having given birth to my older brother, Marshall. He was 3 months old, and he was in the bassinet in the same room right beside the bed where that evil occurred. The rapist was my grandfather, my dad's father, William. He was 50. My mom was 20. It happened in my dad's childhood home in Ohio in November of 1954. My dad, who was in the U.S. Air Force, was away briefly on duty at the time of that, and my mom was staying with his parents. I never knew anything about any of that until my dad downloaded me the day we buried my mom after she died of cancer in 2004. That rape destroyed my mother emotionally, and she never recovered from it. She felt safe, never felt safe again. Couldn't experience the feeling of safety anymore. She developed a horrible case of bipolar depression, as well as what one doctor told her was the worst case of obsessive compulsive disorder he'd ever tried to treat. And by the way, his treatment was unsuccessful. Her emotional distress was visited on the family daily, multiple times a day, every day. After the rape, she told my dad to re-up for duty back in England so she could go back and be near her family and feel safe. Completely understandable and reasonable. They'd lived in England for the next 15 years near her parents and siblings. The only break in that whole 15-year timeline was when my dad got assigned stateside here in Texas, and that's when and where I was born, out in West Texas, out in sort of oil country, an Air Force base out there. And then it was whisk right back to England. I was just a few months old for another roughly 7 years. In 1968, my dad got orders to relocate permanently to the States, and we came back here again to Texas for the next 5 years. This is my family and me coming back to America at the Bon Voyage party aboard the SS United States. What I did not know then, and why should I have known, was that my mother had been raped by her father-in-law, but also my dad's Air Force buddy had raped my brother at the age of 5 while babysitting for my folks. What I also did not know at the time of this picture was the moment of me being raped would happen less than a year later. My mom, no longer having the feeling of safety of family in England, ended any pretense of normality in my childhood. Once in Texas, she took to the bed for a couple of years, barely ever leaving it. She took out her emotional stress and feeling of unsafety and a lack of safety on the family. My brother was able to escape most of that once we got over here, since he was 7 years older than me and he could drive. He was rarely at home, except for when it was time for us to go to sleep, since he and I shared a bedroom. I, on the other hand, got the brunt of her emotional illness, likely, I suppose, because I was around her the most, being the smallest. She soon began to imagine that dirt. And it's kind of hard to picture. So I'm sort of bear with me here. I'm sort of taking you into the mind of somebody who's emotionally unstable and hurt and how that all gets sort of translated into the real world. She imagined that there was dirt everywhere and it had to be prevented from getting into the house. Nothing could be allowed in without being sanitized. Dirt was the priority, making sure it didn't get anywhere. So the floor was dirty and could never be touched with our feet, our bare feet or our stocking feet. Only bedroom slippers. So in an effort to prevent her energetic 7-year-old boy, me, from stirring up the dirt, she'd have me sit on one chair in the house, and then she'd take my bedroom slippers away, confining me to the chair. This happened every day of my childhood for more than 10 years, right until the very day I left for Notre Dame. If I wanted to get off the chair, I had to ask her to bring me my slippers. Occasionally, when my dad was home, I could ask him to, but she was the one who sort of directed all of this. She'd bring my slippers, put them on, escort me to wherever I needed to go, usually the bathroom, nag at me not to stir up too much dirt with unnecessary movement, and then she'd lead me back to the chair where she'd take my shoes away once again. As time went by, my mom's illness grew worse, more dominating, more all-encompassing. Now, for obvious reasons, I'm going to be skipping the daily psychosexual abuse that occurred in the house. Suffice to say, not a single solitary area of life was unscorched by her emotions. This is the case with emotional sickness. This is what it is. It not only affects the person, obviously, it affects the people around them inside the house. You have to begin participating in the lie of the family. It's horrible. And I got to tell you, as I said at the beginning, I'm not telling you everything that went on. I'm giving you some examples that I didn't really find extreme in the entire panoply of stuff that happened to me, and this stuff's bad. But for me, it was just kind of the normal day-to-day thing of what happened. Most people, I would hope, were hearing this or going, what? You put a child in a chair and essentially tied him to the chair, not with ropes, but with orders and nagging and all of that. You tied him to the chair for his entire childhood? When my dad wasn't somewhere else in the world or stateside on assignment, my mom would have him and me go to the grocery store for the week's stuff. This is another case. However, back in the days of cash-only transactions, yeah, they should bring those back, actually, she gave my dad the money with very strict, and I say that somewhat euphemistically, let's just say she was extraordinarily direct with my dad, with instructions that before any food was to be bought, all the cleaning materials must be bought first. Only then could any money be spent on food. So without ever a challenge to any of that, my dad complied. Every week, we'd get to the checkout line at the grocery carts, and get this, you notice I said carts, plural, because 2 or 3 would be overflowing with paper towels like Bounty rolls or whatever, toilet paper, plastic gloves, or those rubber gloves you use for cleaning, all kinds of cleaning agents and so forth. 36 individual rolls of paper towels each week. Yeah, you can do the math on that. My dad would put all that stuff up on the counter first, on the checkout line, the conveyor belt. He'd have the checkout lady run a subtotal. How much did all that add up to? I can't remember exactly, but I seem to think it was $100 we had for groceries for the whole week. It may have only been $50. I can't remember. It was a long time ago. But whatever it was, whatever the subtotal of all those cleaning supplies were, then and only then could whatever remainder amount of money, which was small, be spent on food. So if we didn't have enough money to get all the food my dad had thrown in the cart, we just left it behind. Like any preteen as well as teenage boy, I was hungry pretty much all the time, but I was especially hungry. My parents having sacrificed food for me in exchange for my mom's emotional illness. And that's what it is. In therapy, you kind of have to face some hard truths and understand them the way they actually were in reality. You make up excuses because you don't want to deal with this. Who wants to think of their parents in this kind of way? Who wants to go back to these kinds of memories? This is why therapy, lots of people avoid it. And then people leave it even once they get in it, because you got to think about all of this stuff. And you need to begin to understand the reality of it. And that was the reality of it. My mom's emotional illness was more important than me being nourished. That was the choice my parents made. They made it out of their own pain and all that stuff, but that's their story. This is my story. So we ate, for example, because we couldn't really afford very much after you paid most of your bill, 80% of your bill for paper towels. There's not much left over for food. So we ate the exact same thing every single night. A horrible concoction of boiled vegetables that my brother and I took to calling pig slop. Turnips, rutabagas, cabbage, and if you're going, yuck, well, imagine eating that. Again, every night of childhood once we got to Texas. All of it. My dad had to prepare if he was home, or my mom would prepare on Sunday afternoon. Why? So as not to get dirt and grease all over the kitchen each night from cooking. My mom had this thing in her head that if you put a pot on the stove or something in the oven, all the grease and the heat would get all over the place. She actually, on a few occasions, had us wash down all the walls in the kitchen. Not the countertop, the walls in the kitchen. Because in her mind, as damaged it was from that rape, that's how she saw all of this. There's this horrible dirt and grease all over. We got to clean it. We got to clean it. While I do have a lot of mix of feelings, the dominant feeling I have in there is great sorrow for my mom. What a horrible experience. What a horrible life to have to live. Again, going back to that rape. The pot got brought out of the fridge each night, slightly warmed, again, to limit the steam and the grease and all that imaginary dirt from spreading everywhere if it were begin to boil. So it was never really hot, what we had in front of us. It was kind of lukewarm, those little sort of clumps of, kind of greasy stuff on top, just not quite coagulated. We'd get a bowl of that and some bread, and that was dinner. And again, that was every night of my childhood. My dad went along with all of this, never once defending me or standing up for me to my mom or pleading my cause. Never. Perhaps he was driven by the guilt that it was his father raping her that had set all these wheels in motion. I don't know. Couldn't really get into much of this with him. Never really did. One time, years after my mom had died and my dad was getting up there in years himself, I asked him, I said, Dad, why did you let all of this go on? When I was a kid, where were you? Why didn't you defend me? Now, imagine this. We're standing in his bedroom in my house. He's in his, I want to say, early to mid-80s. He's looking like he's in his early to mid-80s. And he looked back at me, broken and old, and he said, you know how your mother was. I wasn't prepared for any of that, I didn't know what to do. I mean, there was a real sorrow there, and, I dropped it. I didn't want to bring back all these horrible memories for him in his last years of life. But it's true. He didn't defend me. He just let it all go on. 2 weeks, in fact, before I left for Notre Dame, and my dad and I were in the car coming back from my physical for freshman year, he said to me, out of the blue, I'm sitting here, I've got my x-rays and everything in my hands in this big envelope and all excited. I'm going to Notre Dame, and we're leaving in 2 weeks. And out of the blue, he says to me, Gary, I know you didn't have the sort of childhood your mother and I had. You weren't allowed to have friends over and all the food stuff and everything. He said that to me, and I turned towards the passenger window of the car. I actually put the file I had from the hospital up to kind of block his vision of me, and I started crying, and I started crying hard. All of that's a brief look behind the curtain of my daily childhood, and believe me when I tell you, all of that was the gentle stuff, and I mean gentle in comparison to the other stuff. People can be abused physically, sexually, They can be abused physically, not exactly sexually, like in touching or something, but they can be abused in how they're treated physically. Then they can be abused psychosexually, where never a finger is laid on anybody, but there's a whole other thing going on here. This is all various sorts of levels of stuff. And for the record, because I know a number of you have asked, many of you have asked in the comments, no, it was not my father, despite lies from a priest and a crazy anti-Semite who published a book in great glee about all of this. Those are lies. They have no idea of knowing what happened to me because they don't know. I do. It was not my father. And I say that on a stack of Bibles. It was not my father who abused me physically, sexually. Now, all of that other stuff, it's way too hard to share in this forum. But I promise you, it was crippling, it was emasculating, and it was devastating, and it was virtually every day. A few months after starting therapy here in Houston, I decided I was going to move here. I came down here really just for this, with plans to go back to Detroit. When I got down here, I actually got a herniated disc, of all things. No idea how that happened. And I had to undergo surgery, and the pain was incredibly intense. And while I was recovering from that, I was like, you know what? I like it here in Houston. I'm a native Texan. I love the warmth. Everybody who knows me knows how much I hate the cold. So I sold my house in Detroit, packed up, and headed back to Houston with a very dear friend who helped me with all of that relocation. There are a couple of friends also in Detroit who were didn't actually help with the move per se, but they were very, very helpful. And through some pain, very helpful in helping me begin to sort of resort my life. So along the way back down here, we stopped at my grandfather's grave in Ohio, my dad's father who raped my mom. I'd never met him, even once, but I had this kind of big sense that I should go to his grave. So I was numb, standing there, looking at his headstone, not really sure what I would or should feel. And so I said to him, "You son of a bitch, you raped my mother. You destroyed her, and you ruined my life in part as a result." Then I prayed for him that he'd not be in hell. So loaded back up in the truck, finished the drive, and started over, as it were, here in Houston. Here's the reason I'm saying all of this. After about 18 months in therapy, because if as smashed and broken as I was from all of that, and I absolutely is, whatever, however, tense you want to put it in, recovering. They call it recovery as in a present tense on purpose. If I, who could manage to be sitting here today, after all of that, if our Lord can begin to bring me out of it, he can bring you out of it too. Or somebody that you love, who you suspect might have great pain from childhood. Let's lay it out in absolute simple terms here. I hated my childhood. And to a point here, because my mom wouldn't let anything come in the house that hadn't been cleaned or whatever, we never had a Christmas tree. We never had Christmas presents. There was no way to bring all of that in and sanitize them, so to speak. My childhood was effed up from the moment we hit the ground here in Texas and my mom lost her sense of safety from her family in England. I hated my childhood. I hated my circumstances, and I hated myself because my parents didn't love me, and I felt as though God didn't either. There's a line in the Psalms, "Though father and mother forsake you, I will never forsake you." My parents didn't love me. They emotionally abandoned me, but here's what I've learned in therapy that's been so helpful in kind of my personal reset. Nobody wants to look in the mirror and say, my parents didn't love me. Why did they do this to me? Nobody wants to face that. Whatever it is you got to do to get away from that realization and all the knock-on effects it causes in you, you will do. anything, those feelings get surfaced again and you run like hell from them. What's the point of therapy? It's to begin to process all of this, to go touch the pain, to feel what you felt back then. Not really relive the circumstances of it in kind of an intellectual level, but to feel the pain and encounter the pain so you can begin to make sense of it. So what I have discovered, unearthed in therapy is they didn't love me, but there's a back half of that, because they were incapable of it, not because they chose not to. I think any parent sitting out there hearing any of this, whether your child is or children are younger or somewhat older, I'd ask you to try to understand this from my parents' perspective. Put yourself in their place. You can't imagine, I can't tell you, you can't imagine being a parent and imagining doing this kind of stuff to your children. You just can't. They were incredibly damaged people. But you don't know that when you're 6, 7, 8, 9. There's no way for you to process any of this. So their damage was brought on by circumstances not of their doing. But again, when you're a kid, you can't process the back half of that truth, that they were damaged and so therefore they can't love you in the way that you need to be loved or at all. All you know is the first part. I was not loved. I was not protected. I was not safe. My mom's emotional illness was more important to them than I was. My dad even said to me one time when I was 8 and I was being treated poorly by my mom, yelled at and, told I can't do something that whatever. He said, Gary, he looked right down at me as I was pulling on his pant leg. He looked right down at me and said, Gary, you have to understand your mother. That registered in my head as excusing her meanness to me, not explaining it, excusing it like it was okay, siding with her like he did virtually my entire life. After my mom died, and I say my whole life, not just my childhood when I got up to Notre Dame. After my mom died, my dad continued to side with other women that he'd met or would meet more than me. He said he loved me, which on one level it's true. I don't want to say that he didn't love and like he was like brutal and mean and like going out of his way to make my life miserable. I don't mean to imply that at all. I don't think anything my parents did was intentional to hurt me. It just had that effect. So, again, he would say he loved me, and I do think that's true on one level as much as he was capable of it. But by then, I'd come to expect that I was always going to be second with him, and I was. To make the case here and show how long this continued, one woman he met in Detroit after my mom had died, and I was living there, my dad came to live with me. One woman he met managed to sweet talk about $200,000 out of him over a 10-year period. He paid for her car, didn't just pay for it, he bought her a car, gave her an apartment, signed the lease. He was responsible for it, bought her jewelry, furniture for the whole thing. All of this went on over the course of 10 years. And by the way, it wasn't anything sexual. It had nothing to do with it. I'm showing you my dad's level of stuff. When I discovered it, I said, Dad, you can do whatever you want. It's your money. But I put everything I had financially into Church Militant, and I have essentially nothing left. Did you ever consider saving something to give me once you died? He looked at me when I said that like the thought had never entered his head. So here's a lesson, a very costly lesson for me, but hopefully free for you or somebody that you love. If you have crap in your past that needs your attention, well, then pay it the necessary attention before it takes control. Childhood sucked, period. At home, at school, I had no allies, nothing. It was me, isolated. The feelings of self-hate that arise from all of that, they cause me to lie to myself, about myself, but most especially about God. I've lived like this, with all of this in my heart, for more than half a century, and it's been awful. waking up every day and avoiding that mirror to my soul. So here's my hope. Why I'm doing all this, why I'm saying all this. I'm going to say it for the rest of the week here, 5 episodes. That someone or some people out there listening to all of this, once you get past the of it all, will connect with their feelings over their own childhood torture. We don't have the same circumstances, nobody does, but we do share the same feelings about them. And those feelings create all sorts of knock-on effects in your life. They're controlling you, whether you realize it or not. They're preventing your happiness. Even if every now and then you do have a momentary escape from it, it all comes back. Until you control it, it controls you. And the battle against it, it's ferocious. It's draining. It's anger-causing. I'm here to tell you to fight. Fight like you've never fought against or for anything in your life. And here's the key point. Here's the takeaway. Because regardless of what happened to you and then what you did in response to it, you are worth it. Regardless of the lies you told yourself that you suck and you're worthless. God made you for himself. You're not worthless. That's a lie from the devil, the father of lies, who uses our shame and all of those circumstances, always lurking about, skulking about, looking for some way in. He uses all that to try to shame us emotionally and block us from reaching out to God for help. If you can't admit it to yourself, how can you admit it to God? That's kind of where you wind up on this plane. Well, I hate myself, and I hate myself because God let all this stuff happen to me, so why would he care now? So therefore, that road is blocked. That's a lie from the devil. So, a couple examples of the lies. Well, here they are. You aren't good enough to ask God for something, not after everything you've done. It's a lie. If God really loved you, he wouldn't have let all of that happen to you. He doesn't care about you. He's at least indifferent. Big lie. From everything I can muster after these past 18 months of intense pain and struggle in therapy, let me say fight. Never stop fighting. And again, I'm sharing all of this because if I can arrive at this point after everything that happened to me as an unloved child, so can you. No one is outside the realm of God's love. No one, including you. Coming to you from Houston, Texas, I'm Gary Michael Voris. God love you.